A luxury jet on its maiden voyage is jolted in midair.
Declare an emergency. We have a wind chip!
The plane has lost part of its wing.
It became clear that we were in very, very big trouble.
The crew struggles to land the badly damaged plane.
November 600, X-ray Lima, declare an emergency.
But the trouble isn't over when they hit the ground. The crew is detained and questioned by police. Somehow, this small plane has triggered the worst crisis in Brazilian aviation history. September the 29th, 2006, in São José dos Campos, Brazil.
3, 2, 1!
It's a big day at Embraer headquarters. The Brazilian aviation firm has just sold a brand new private jet to XLR, a US charter company. The price tag, $25 million.
It's a beautiful airplane, and there was a beautiful little ceremony that Embraer had in the hangar just before we got on the plane. And the guys from XLR were particularly proud.
The Legacy is a modified regional jet. The cabin redesigned for comfort. It can seat up to 13 people. And in its first 4 years of service, Embraer has delivered almost 100 of these sleek business jets. XLR will use the jet to fly customers around the world. But first, the company has to get the plane up to the United States. Joseph Lepore and Jan Palladino will be at the controls for the jet's maiden voyage. They've been down in Brazil for a couple of weeks, getting familiar with the new plane. Joe Sharkey is a reporter for the New York Times. He's been offered a free ride home.
We were delivering an airplane, basically, and my role was hitchhiker, and they kindly invited me along.
The Legacy jet is heading to Manaus in northern Brazil, a stopover on its way to New York. Half an hour after takeoff, the Legacy is flying over the heart of Brazil. The countryside stretches out below. The view out of the window is spectacular.
I glanced out and I was amazed. Just to the horizon, nothing but treetops. And I just remember how pretty it seemed.
At 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, the Legacy jet makes contact with controllers at the Brasilia Area Control Center, still nearly 100 kilometers away.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, flight level 370, good afternoon.
PA 229, race altitude 3952, race altitude 329. Yes, Roger.
75% of the country's air traffic is handled by the controllers in this room.
The traffic volume is larger than in any other control center in the country.
One of the many planes they'll be dealing with today is the Legacy jet. Every flight that's handled by Brasilia ACC appears on computer screens as a small circle moving in the direction of the plane. The computer also displays the plane's actual and planned altitudes.
November 600 X-ray Lima. Stock ident.
Roger.
Palladino sends out a signal. Controllers use it to confirm that the data on their screen is coming from the plane they think it is.
Radar surveillance.
An hour later, the flight has settled into a familiar routine.
Mood sort of settled down, everybody was working, and it was just a very, very calm and peaceful time. I was transcribing notes from one of the interviews from the Embraer tour.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
But in the cockpit, Palladino is having trouble getting back in touch with air traffic controllers in Brasilia.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
He can't raise controllers on the frequency he used almost an hour ago. He tries other channels.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima. Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
After 12 attempts, Palladino finally gets in touch with Brasilia ACC, this time with a different controller who provides radio frequencies for future contact.
Contact 123.32. 26.5.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last two. Sorry, say frequency one more time for November 600 X-ray Lima.
The Legacy loses radio contact again.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
As the pilots try to restore communication with Brasilia, the plane continues to power through the sky. It's just minutes before 5 o'clock.
Suddenly there was the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life. The concussion itself seemed to affect every atom in my body.
What the hell was that?
Just fly the airplane, dude.
They're an emergency. Sit down back there.
No one's sure what's happened to the jet. But when Joe Sharkey looks out of the window, he's stunned by what he sees.
The end of the wing was chopped off and it was serrated. It looked like it had been chewed off. It became clear that we were in very, very big trouble.
XLR Vice President Ralph McHaley rushes to the window for a look at the damage.
I said to Ralph, "How bad is it?" And he looked at me and he said, "It's bad."
With more experience flying this type of plane, co-pilot Palladino takes over control of the limping jet.
Just let me fly the thing, dude. All right? We're descending. I want to get down.
Okay, it's yours.
The crew still can't make contact with controllers.
November 600 X-ray Lima, declaring an emergency. Do we have a wingtip? No!
The entire tip of the Legacy's wing is breaking up. That affects airflow and is making the plane hard to control.
Yeah, you doing okay?
As the plane begins to descend, passengers in the back are worried that the damaged wing is getting worse.
Our main concern was that wing, but it had taken such a hit that the structural integrity of the wing was obviously in question. The leading edge was separating.
With so much damage to the wing, the pilots can't turn sharply. Too much stress could rip the wing right off.
We were in a position where we realized we were going to die. I thought of my wife, and I thought, well, okay, one thing I can do is I can write a note to my wife, which I did. I took out my reporter's notebook, and I wrote, a short note saying that I loved her and that, just saying what I could.
The Amazon is a bad place to have to land a plane. It's a dense jungle for as far as the eye can see.
There's nothing down there but trees. And I thought, where are they going to put this airplane down?
Just hours into its maiden voyage, the badly damaged jet is going down. Palladino and Lepore's flying will soon be analyzed and debated throughout Brazil. The verdict against them will be harsh.
Please answer, November 600 X-ray Lima.
The crew of the Legacy jet searches desperately for a place to land their crippled plane. Captain Joseph Lepore finds a small military base on his chart.
November 600 X-ray Lima, we have an emergency.
State your emergency.
November 600 X-ray Lima, declaring an emergency. We need to land at Sierra Bravo Charlie Charlie. Is that your airport?
Affirmative.
Do you know how long your runway is?
2600 meters.
Stand by. 2600, that's good, right? 8,000 feet? Okay, we're coming in. We're declaring an emergency. This is November 600 X-ray Lima. Did you see something? Something hit us.
2,600 meters is more than long enough to land the Legacy, but the crew doesn't know how the plane will respond when it touches down.
The canopy of green, there was a slash of brown, 2 miles away. I heard Joe say, "There's an airport."
Sierra Bravo, we see you. We're coming in.
Finding an airport was a stroke of luck, but the crew's troubles are far from over. Now they have to get the damaged jet safely on the ground. Palladino and Lepore can't configure their plane for a routine landing.
Hold it. Let's dump the flaps at the top of the flare, right? So give me 9 on the flare.
9.
Extending flaps increases the size of the wing. Since a bigger wing can generate more lift, pilots can slow down to land.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
With all the damage they've sustained, the crew doesn't want to put too much pressure on their wing. They won't be able to extend their flaps until the last moment. They'll have to land faster than usual.
Everyone sit down back there.
When you land under those sort of circumstances, you're landing faster than you normally would. And you get a real appreciation of just how fast an airplane is actually moving, because you're coming down like gangbusters. I see these trees now, at ground level, just sort of, it look almost like a movie with one of those moving backgrounds. And I'm thinking, I hope this runway doesn't run out.
You got it.
Palladino hits the brakes hard.
Good. Good. You got it. Hold it.
Then finally the plane begins to slow.
Woo! Good job. Oh, man.
And then finally, we just did come to a halt. There's that beautiful silence that occurs when the engines are shut down and everything was just quiet again.
For more than 25 minutes, the business jet had flown with part of its wing torn off. There's also damage to the plane's tail. Somehow, high over the rainforest, something tore into the plane. The bizarre day takes another strange twist. Because they've landed at a military base, soldiers confiscate the passports of everyone on board.
And that's the point at which I realized that we were in custody. I don't think the others on the airplane had the immediate sense that this was a custodial situation.
Along with the 2 pilots, the jet's passengers are taken to the nearby airbase.
Hey, 600 XL. Range altitude 3200.
The emergency on board the Legacy jet has thrown Brasilia ACC into turmoil. But it's not the only problem controllers there are facing.
Takeoff.
Another plane they're expecting to see hasn't shown up. Goal Flight 1907 should be on radar in Brasilia. The missing flight is a Boeing 737 with 154 people on board. It's been in the air for 2 hours and should be nearing Brasilia. But controllers there can't find any trace of that plane.
Manaus, there isn't any goal. There isn't any goal with us here.
It's on its way.
They check its status with controllers in Manaus, who were last in contact with the plane.
Anxiety was high, and controllers were confused about what to say. They didn't know what was happening.
Deep in the Amazon, those who were on the XL Air jet are also struggling to figure out what happened.
We hit something, man. That's all I know.
Maybe it was a condor.
Are you kidding? It was 37,000 feet.
Well, maybe it was a military jet.
No, I think the plane must have exploded and we flew through the debris field.
There would have been more impact.
As they're trying to piece together the day's strange events, the group gets some shocking news. A Goal flight has crashed. It's the plane that's been missing.
I just heard the 737 went down in the Amazon right where we were.
It was like a thunderclap. The world changed immediately. And Joe and Jan were just stricken. I don't think I've ever seen 2 more anguished men in my life.
The Goal flight crashed right where the Legacy lost a piece of its wing. It can't be a coincidence. Approximately 100 kilometers from the military base, the wreckage of Gol Flight 1907 has been found.
The greatest difficulty involved the fact that the plane fell straight down. When it hit the ground, the trees covered it up, making it hard to get to.
The shattered remains of the plane litter the jungle floor. The news hits controllers in Brasilia extremely hard.
They had just realized that the worst thing that could happen in air control happened. People were crying. A lot of people had to be dragged out of the room. Things were not under control in the room.
Over the next several days, troops pour over the scene of the Gol crash. The dense jungle slows their progress.
To walk about 1 kilometer in the forest took us about an hour.
A makeshift helicopter landing pad is carved out of the jungle. It's becoming increasingly clear that no one has survived. 154 people are killed. At the time, it's the worst crash in the history of Brazilian aviation. What had happened in the skies above the Amazon? Investigators face a mammoth job. Colonel Rufino Ferreira is in charge of the investigation into the Gol crash.
An investigator always has to keep an open mind. You can't start with any preconceived ideas. When we arrived at the location of the accident, the only thing we knew for sure was that we had found the plane that was missing.
The wreckage of the Gol jet is spread over more than 2 kilometers. The widespread debris tells investigators that the plane ripped apart before crashing to the ground.
The aircraft disintegrated during the fall. It hit the ground in pieces. There was practically no damage caused by the impact with the ground. The plane had already fallen apart.
On October the 2nd, just 3 days after the crash, the plane's flight data recorder is found. Most of the cockpit voice recorder is also recovered, except for one critical part.
In this accident, the impact was so strong that the module separated from the recorder.
Modern voice recorders don't use tape. Conversations are recorded digitally onto a memory module. But that part of the Gol CVR has broken free. Without it, the rest of the cockpit voice recorder is useless. While the search for the module continues, Ferreira looks at the information from the 737's flight data recorder. He learns that the plane was flying at 37,000 feet. It was on course and flying level at its assigned altitude. Then, without warning, the plane pitched over and plummeted toward the ground. Whatever happened, it was sudden and catastrophic. The data recorder tells Ferreira that the plane spun 11 times before it hit the ground.
Manaus, I can't see Gol. There isn't any Gol with us here.
It's on its way.
So it's already in my area?
For over half an hour.
Police investigators want to know what air traffic controllers can tell them about Gol Flight 1907's final minutes.
There was no Mayday. In fact, we never had contact with the Gol jet.
Controllers say there was no warning that the jet was in trouble. It simply vanished. Colonel Ferreira studies air traffic control data from the day of the accident. There is no sign of the Gol flight. But the readings from the smaller Legacy jet capture his attention. It seems to be flying erratically. Instead of keeping to a single altitude, the radar shows it flying up and down dangerously. Perhaps the private jet pilots were testing out their new plane by climbing and descending quickly. They may have collided with the Gold jet as a result of their reckless flying. When that information leaks out to the country's newspapers, it makes front-page news.
The population thought it was unjust that a smaller aircraft was able to make an emergency landing while the larger aircraft with 154 people just fell into the Amazon and everyone died.
Neither Lepore nor Palladino are officially charged, but they are confined to a hotel room in Brazil while the investigation continues. Ferreira interviews the two pilots about what they did and what they saw.
Look, we were proceeding northwest on course to Manaus at 37,000 feet. Okay, we were attempting to contact Brazilian control.
Were you changing altitude?
No.
I was on the plane. Had the plane been flying erratically or doing loop-de-loops or whatever it was, I think I would have had a pretty good story for the New York Times.
Did you say you were flying at 37,000 feet?
Yes, that's right. Flight level 370. We never moved from that.
When he reviews the information from the Legacy's flight data recorder, Ferreira confirms the pilot's story. Although the ground radar shows the Legacy flying wildly, the data from the plane shows that it didn't change altitude at all. But there is something shocking about the Legacy's path. The business jet was flying north to Manaus, the Gold flight south from Manaus. Ferreira can see that both planes were flying at the same altitude, 37,000 feet. He makes a horrifying discovery. For some reason, the two planes were on a collision course. Air traffic is typically routed along specific corridors through the sky, essentially highways in the air. But planes traveling in opposite directions are supposed to be separated by at least 1,000 feet.
The airway system, for instance, between Brasilia and Manaus is very simple. It makes airplanes fly northbound, maintaining even levels, and airplanes flying southbound, maintaining odd levels.
But somehow, the Legacy jet and the Gol 737 were traveling down the same aerial highway in opposite directions. For long minutes, they were heading straight for each other. It seems more and more likely that the two planes collided. At the crash site, workers find support for this incredible theory. The left wing of the Gol flight is recovered. Investigators discover that about halfway along the wing, it's sliced clean through. None of the other wreckage is sliced this way. The precise nature of the cut tells Ferreira that this is not damage that was caused by impact with the ground.
The damage on the left wing clearly shows that it was caused by a collision with another plane.
The badly damaged wing would have sent the 737 into a spiral dive. The pilots would have had no way of controlling it. The sudden spiral motion would have pulled the plane apart. It's the reason the wreckage is spread over such a wide area. Ferreira finds the most conclusive evidence of a collision on the Legacy's damaged wing.
Foram encontradas marcas muito pequenas.
On the Legacy, we found very small traces of paint that came from the Gold wing.
Considerada como da cor da aeronave, da Gol.
Together, the planes had a combined speed of 1,600 kilometers an hour. At that speed, the wingtip of the small jet easily sliced through the 737. Colonel Ferreira now understands what caused the Gol jet to crash, but he doesn't know why. How had the two jets ended up in the exact same airspace without anybody noticing? Investigators in Brazil now realize that they are dealing with something very unusual.
A mid-air collision is a very rare event in aviation, and it should not have happened with two very modern new aircrafts.
The situation becomes more complicated when investigators study a critical document, the Legacy's flight plan.
Flight plans are filed by using a standard form which is the same all over the world. The form will contain the flight number as well as requested flight level or altitude.
According to this document, when it collided with the Gol flight, the executive jet wasn't expected to be at 37,000 feet. The Legacy's flight plan called for the jet to fly at 37,000 feet only until it reached Brasilia, then descend to 36,000. But the collision took place 850 kilometers northwest of Brasilia, well past the point where the Legacy was supposed to descend. So why hadn't the Legacy followed its flight plan?
The flight plan calls for you to descend to 360 at Brasilia. Why didn't you?
We weren't told to. Before we took off, we were cleared for 370 all the way to Manaus. That's what we did, sir. I don't know where you're getting the information from. Yeah, we followed the rules.
We were not told to descend, and we did not descend.
Colonel Ferreira needs to check the story that the crew is telling. He wants to know exactly what they were told by controllers when they took off from São José dos Campos.
November 600 X-ray Lima, ATC permission for Manaus, flight level 370.
The Legacy's last instruction was to fly all the way to Manaus at 37,000 feet. The pilots obeyed that instruction even though it differed from their flight plan.
Air traffic control always can deviate from the flight plan because they have best knowledge of the actual traffic situation.
Leaving Manaus, the Gol jet was also cleared to fly at 37,000 feet. Both planes were assigned the same altitude by controllers at opposite ends of the country.
Once we were certain that both planes were flying at the same altitude, we knew for sure there would be a lot to investigate on the side of air traffic control.
Ferreira turns his attention to conversations between controllers in Brasilia and the Legacy jet. The cockpit voice recorder from the Legacy gives investigators a remarkably detailed look into what happened on the private jet. The brand new Legacy jet has a state-of-the-art recorder that captures 2 hours of conversation.
The CVR was probably the most important component in the investigation.
November 600 X-ray.
At 10 minutes to 4, the crew is told to change radio frequencies and get in touch with the controller monitoring their flight.
Change frequency to 125050.
Decimal 1, I'm sorry, 12505, good day.
Good day.
At this point, the Legacy jet is approaching Brasilia, but the crew never receives any instructions regarding their altitude.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, level 370, good afternoon.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
When the Legacy overflew Brasilia at flight level 370, according to the flight plan, it should have been descending to 360, but air traffic controllers simply forgot to give the order to the Legacy to descend to 360.
The pilots would have assumed they were meant to stay at 370, 37,000 feet.
No airplane should ever change altitudes without receiving instructions from air traffic control.
To discover why controllers didn't give that crucial instruction, Colonel Ferreira takes a closer look at the technology used to monitor the traffic over Brazil.
So, can you call up the Legacy jet screen for me?
Na tela radar, nós recebemos a informação.
On the radar screen, we see the altitude, speed, and the transponder information of each plane.
Nós chamamos que é o código transponder da aeronave para a identificação de cada aeronave.
Each flight has an individual code assigned to it that helps controllers track it. Underneath that, there are two separate numbers. On the left, the plane's actual altitude. On the right, the altitude the plane is supposed to be at according to its flight plan.
So here, the number changes to 360.
As the Legacy jet passed over Brasilia, the number on the right, the planned altitude, changed. The computerized system automatically updated it. According to the flight plan, at this point, the plane was supposed to descend to 36,000 feet, 360.
To my knowledge, only Brazilian air traffic control system is using this kind of design. In other parts of the world, this update has to be done manually.
The computer changed a single number, which led to a critical error. Without much experience with the computerized system, the controller mistook the new planned altitude for the plane's actual altitude.
Só que o sistema mudou automaticamente, mudando o nível autorizado para...
The system changed it automatically from the authorized altitude to the planned altitude, which made the controller believe the Legacy was flying at 360.
Quando o outro controlador veio assumir o serviço, ele passou para ele o nível que estava no plano de voo 360.
Police investigators talk with the controller who was on duty when the number changed on the screen.
It was shortly after that I went on break. Lucivando relieved me.
He tells police about a critical mistake on his part.
You have 5 aircraft. The Legacy is at 360.
Before leaving, he handed his flights off to another controller, telling him where he thought the Legacy was flying.
I believe it was at 360, and that's what I told you.
When the new controller took over, the one being relieved gave him the Legacy's altitude information according to the flight plan, 360.
But the jet was actually flying 1,000 feet higher, right in the path of the goal flight. Colonel Ferreira studies transcripts of conversations on board the Legacy and finds that the crew was having their own difficulties during the flight.
How much longer, guys? That's a good question, Ralph.
The crew seems unfamiliar with some of the jet's advanced systems.
Still working out the kinks on how to work this flight management system. Where's the one that gives us total time?
My impression is that the pilots were trying to learn their aircraft systems during the flight.
Investigators also uncover a breakdown in communications.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, flight level 370, good afternoon.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
After a brief conversation between the Legacy jet and Brasilia ACC, Colonel Ferreira notices something extremely unusual. For almost an hour, the Legacy pilots don't talk to anyone on the ground.
They stayed 57 minutes without attempting any contact with air traffic control, which seems like a lot of time. After 57 minutes, they tried to call 12 times without success.
Realizaram inicialmente 12 tentativas de chamada, sem sucesso.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
Palladino did try to get hold of ground control, but he couldn't get through.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
He then tried the backup frequencies listed on his navigation charts.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
His only contact, a single garbled message.
6 Smoke 5.
Sorry, say frequency one more time for November 600 X-ray Lima.
Both pilots and air traffic controller should have been more concerned of maintaining two-way contact all the time. This is their duty.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
Had pilots and controllers spoken, they might have discovered that the Legacy was flying north in a corridor reserved for southbound traffic. As the public learns about the mistakes in the Air Traffic Control Center, there is growing pressure to make some changes.
We wanted to understand what had happened to these people inside the control room. The controllers should have been able to see on their radar screens that these two airplanes were flying in a collision course.
Brazilian air traffic control is one of the last in the world to be run largely by the country's military.
Since they're run by the military, they're run by the Brazilian Air Force, we did not have complete access to information except for what was released.
As fingers are pointed at controllers, many of them come forward with stories of overwork and poor training.
They complained that they weren't well trained in English language, which is the international aviation language. Also, they had complaints about their equipment.
In fact, the controller who incorrectly reported the Legacy's altitude had been on the job for only a year. A valuable piece of the puzzle is still missing. Investigators still don't know what happened during the final minutes of the GOL flight. Soldiers have been scouring the Amazon jungle with metal detectors looking for the plane's missing memory module. Almost a month after the crash, they find it. Colonel Ferreira hopes to hear some reason why the GOL crew wasn't able to avoid colliding with an oncoming jet.
GOL 1907. Contact Brasilia. ACC on 125.2. A good flight.
Thanks very much, Brasilia 12.2. GOL 1907.
There are no alarms before the collision. No warning that they were flying straight for another jet. Pilots rely on air traffic controllers to keep other planes out of their path. They spend much of their time monitoring their instruments, not the skies ahead. At the speed they're traveling, they'd only have to look away for a few seconds to miss an approaching plane.
There were no issues of communication and no misunderstanding between the pilots and air traffic control. They had no idea what had just happened to their plane and fought until the end to regain control.
For less than a minute, the pilots struggle for control, but there's nothing they can do. But why were there no warnings? Both planes were equipped with a safety feature designed to prevent exactly this type of accident. Ferreira now needs to know why that system failed. Earlier in the investigation, strange radar images suggested that the Legacy pilots were flying wildly over the Amazon. Now those suspicions have vanished, but Ferreira revisits the fluctuating radar data to understand why neither plane knew the other was coming.
You see, the altitude is varying significantly.
To try to understand this last piece of the puzzle, Colonel Ferreira returns to the radar display that air traffic controllers saw the day of the crash. Instead of displaying just the expected altitude and the actual altitude, the letter Z appears between them.
The Z on the air traffic controller screens indicates that the airplane he's looking at has lost its transponder.
Modern commercial aircraft are equipped with transponders. Like small radio stations, they broadcast information on the plane's altitude and flight number. This information is received by computers on the ground and instantly displayed on the screens of air traffic controllers. In Brasilia, if the transponder fails, so-called primary radar takes over automatically. Signals are sent out from the ground that hit the target and return. Those readings are wildly inaccurate.
Primary radar only is a passive indication of anything that is flying through the airspace. The difference of the actual altitude in the primary radar system might differ several thousand feet.
The inaccuracy of the radar tracking the Legacy jet explains why its altitude appeared to be rising and falling. Investigators discover that the transponder wasn't sending out signals for more than 50 minutes before the crash. but controllers didn't notify the pilots. That may be because they didn't notice the subtle change.
A forma como é apresentado para o controlador não é.
The way in which the information is displayed to the controller does not visually alert him to the change. There are no flashing lights that would tell the controller that the plane has lost its transponder.
Chamasse realmente a atenção do controlador para que, aquele momento, aquela aeronave perdeu.
There's an even more critical role played by the transponder. It doesn't just beam information to controllers on the ground, but to other planes as well. All commercial aircraft are equipped with a warning system called TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System.
TCAS gives relative position of other airplanes within range of your own airplane.
TCAS picks up a signal from an oncoming plane's transponder and issues a warning if it's too close. If either plane's transponder is off, the system won't work.
What the hell was that?
Ferreira discovers that the Legacy's transponder was working early in the flight and after the collision. But for more than 50 critical minutes, it was silent. How had a state-of-the-art jet, just off the factory floor, developed problems with its transponder?
Parada de funcionamento de transmissão do transponder.
The failure of the transponder certainly contributed to this accident.
Para a ocorrência do acidente. E nós tínhamos.
And we had to find out what caused it to fail.
O que causou essa interrupção no funcionamento?
Investigators examine the Legacy jet's transponder unit. They discover that the system which controls it had a troubled history. It had been installed on a different plane, but removed because it wasn't working. It was repaired and then placed on the jet that was sold to XLR. Investigators have the system tested. But even with its suspicious past, after the crash they can find no obvious problems with the plane's transponder.
Now this is the layout now on the standard one in the Legacy jet.
Colonel Ferreira does notice something potentially dangerous about the design of the Legacy's cockpit. If a pilot uses the built-in footrest during flight, his toes can come in contact with the buttons on the transponder.
Here, show me what it looks like in standby mode.
And when the transponder does go into standby, it would be difficult for a pilot to notice.
There's no alarm?
A small yellow warning light is the only indication that the transponder isn't on.
It was not easy for the pilots to detect that because it's not hooked up with the central warning and alert system.
But the pilots of the Legacy jet do not remember using the plane's footrest.
Still working out the kinks on how to work this flight management system. Time.
Investigators suspect that one of the pilots may have turned the transponder off by mistake.
No momento, o cenário provável.
The most probable scenario is that by accident, one of the pilots temporarily turned off the equipment as he tried to familiarize himself with the technology on board.
Com os equipamentos de bordo.
However, the transponder went off. At a critical moment, the crew had no last-ditch safety system to warn them that they were flying right at a 737. Even though the TCAS system on the GOL plane was working, there was no signal from the approaching jet for it to receive. Closing in on each other at 1,600 kilometers an hour, the pilots never saw each other coming. Brazil's air traffic control system would undergo some radical changes as a result of the collision. But those changes would not come without a fight. The investigation into the crash of GOL Flight 1907 has uncovered dangerous problems with Brazil's air traffic control system.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray, Lima, level 370, good afternoon.
Two planes were assigned to fly at the same altitude in the same airspace.
Radar surveillance.
Overworked and inexperienced controllers in Brasilia neglected to instruct the Legacy jet to descend to 36,000 feet.
You have 5 aircraft. The Legacy is at 367.
Then they mistook the Legacy's planned altitude for its actual altitude. To make matters worse, the Legacy pilots, unfamiliar with Brazilian airspace, were unable to make contact with controllers on the ground. And somehow the transponder, which broadcasts their location in the sky, went silent, which controllers in Brasilia failed to notice.
Keep going! Keep going!
A multi-billion-dollar ATC system designed to keep planes apart had failed to detect 2 planes on a collision course.
Uma série de erros, de falhas humanas ocorreram e onde as defesas.
One by one, a series of human errors occurred, and all of the defense systems that exist to avoid these errors were defeated.
Esses erros foram sendo uma a uma vencidas.
A month after the crash of the Gol passenger plane, controllers begin a work to rule campaign. They want to draw attention to problems with the system.
Once they did start working to the rules and not stretching them anymore, this triggered what we called the aviation crisis in Brazil. At a certain point, maybe 40% of flights in all of Brazil had over an hour delays.
Following the crash and the work slowdown, changes start being made.
There has been a lot of changes in Brazilian aviation after the accident, specifically with regards to air traffic control. The Air Force had to admit that they had a shortage of controllers, and also there's a higher degree of accountability.
In the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration issues 2 recommendations as a result of the tragedy. Pilots flying Legacy jets are warned of the possibility that putting their feet up in the cockpit could accidentally turn off the transponder. And manufacturers are told that an alarm should sound if the TCAS system shuts off. The controllers who were involved in the crash are charged with varying degrees of manslaughter. But those criminal charges worry people who were closely involved with the disaster.
Trabalhar uma investigação com fins de prevenção, quando existe uma
An investigation like ours, which focuses on prevention, suffers huge setbacks when there is pressure to lay charges.
comoção muito grande por ter sido o maior acidente.
By blaming people, we might be creating a culture where people will not come forth and be honest about failures and mistakes. And when we try to hide that, things get swept under the carpet, and soon enough they'll come out again.
Nenhum controlador sai de casa ou...
No controller leaves his home in the morning thinking he's going to crash a plane. And so the criminalization only interferes with investigations that can prevent further accidents.
Pode vir a evitar novos acidentes.
More than 2 months after the crash, the crew of the Legacy jet is finally allowed to return to the United States.
Joe and Jan barely got out of the country. There was an attempt to hold them under what I thought was a cobbled together initial criminal charge of, quote, failing to ensure the safety of Brazilian skies.
While we are all grateful for the safe return of Joe and Jan and everyone aboard the Legacy, we are all saddened by this tragedy which took many innocent lives.
More than a year after the accident, the Legacy jet that survived a mid-air collision was still at the airfield in the Amazon. Its maiden voyage cut short by a tragic series of technological and human errors.